Picture this. The Bohemian Forest, March 1944. Snow falls through ancient pines, muffling the sound of boots on frozen ground. A convoy of 6 Wehrmacht trucks winds through a logging road that shouldn't exist on any map. In the lead vehicle sits Oberst Karl Steiner, a man whose name appears in no official military roster, whose face exists in no photograph, whose very existence will be denied by every government that touches this story for the next 80 years. He's come to build something that was never meant to be found. And in 3 weeks, he will disappear so completely that even those who worked beside him will begin to doubt he was ever real. The forest chosen for this operation straddled the border between German-occupied Czechoslovakia and Bavaria, a wilderness so dense that local hunters told stories of men who'd walked into its depths and never emerged. The Germans didn't choose this location for its isolation alone. Beneath the moss and centuries of fallen leaves lay something far older. A cave system, vast and unmapped, carved by underground rivers that had stopped flowing long before Rome was born. And deep within that system, in a chamber that would one day be called the Circle of Dawn, Colonel Karl Steiner would build his secret base. Steiner himself was an enigma wrapped in Wehrmacht gray. Born in 1903 in Salzburg to a family of architects, he'd studied engineering at the Technical University of Munich before the Nazi rise to power. Unlike many officers of his generation, Steiner had never joined the party. He had no political ideology beyond efficiency, no loyalty beyond the work itself. His superiors described him as brilliant but unsettling, a man who could design fortifications that defied conventional military thinking, who understood structural engineering at a level that seemed almost intuitive. Some whispered he was touched by genius. Others suggested madness. By 1944, the distinction had ceased to matter. His assignment came directly from the highest levels of military intelligence, though the paper trail, if it ever existed, has long since been destroyed. What survived were fragments. A memo dated January 15, 1944, referencing Project Morgenrot, Morning Red. A requisition for mining equipment, concrete, and materials that made no sense for standard construction. And a single photograph taken by accident by a surveyor in February 1944 showing a man in an officer's coat standing at the entrance to what appeared to be a natural cave. The man's face was turned away, but the insignia on his collar matched Steiner's rank. The photograph vanished from official archives in 1947. It reappeared on a black market antiquities website in 2018, sold for €12,000 to an anonymous buyer, and vanished again. The construction of the base took 47 days, an impossibility by any standard timeline. But Steiner had resources that defied documentation. Workers arrived in sealed trucks, their origins unknown, their faces never recorded. They worked in shifts that ran 24 hours, cutting into the cave system with precision that suggested they were following pre-existing plans. Plans that predated the war. Plans that, if contemporary accounts are to be believed, Steiner claimed to have found rather than created. One of the few surviving witnesses was a Czech partisan named Viktor Novak, who observed the construction from a distance while conducting reconnaissance for the resistance. Years later, in testimony given to British intelligence officers, Novak described what he saw. Trucks arriving at night carrying not just materials, but crates marked with symbols he didn't recognize. Not swastikas, not military designations. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, circles within circles, spirals that seemed to move when you looked away. He watched German soldiers unload those crates with extreme care as if they contained something fragile, or dangerous, or both. The base itself was a marvel of concealed engineering. The cave entrance was hidden behind a false rock face that could be opened hydraulically from within. Beyond it, tunnels extended nearly a mile into the mountain, connecting natural chambers that had been reinforced with concrete and steel. Steiner designed the complex on 3 levels, each progressively deeper and more secure. The first level contained barracks, supply storage, and what appeared to be a standard military command center. The second level housed a research laboratory, its purpose deliberately vague in the few documents that mentioned it. And the third level, the deepest, was sealed behind a vault door that required authorization from Berlin to open. Authorization that, according to every record that survived the war, was never given. By April 1944, the base was operational. A garrison of 47 men had been assigned to it, though their names appear on no unit roster. They were specialists, engineers, scientists, men selected not for their combat experience, but for their expertise in fields that remained classified even after their disappearance. Radio intercepts from the period, declassified in 2003, reference transmissions from the Bohemian Forest using call signs that matched no known German military units. The messages were brief, technical, and completely incomprehensible to Allied codebreakers. One intercepted phrase appeared repeatedly, enough times that analysts flagged it as significant. Die Tür ist offen. The door is open. Steiner's behavior during this period grew increasingly erratic. A supply officer who delivered materials to a rendezvous point 5 miles from the base later recalled the colonel's appearance in late May. Gaunt, he said, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, but focused with an intensity that was frightening. The officer asked if everything was proceeding according to plan. Steiner's response, delivered in a flat monotone, stayed with him for the rest of his life. There is no plan. There never was. We're simply following what was already here. June brought the first disappearances. A patrol of 4 Wehrmacht soldiers conducting routine reconnaissance in the area failed to return to their base camp. Search parties found their equipment scattered along a game trail that led toward the hidden entrance to Steiner's complex. But the trail ended abruptly, footprints simply stopping as if the men had been lifted from the earth. No bodies were ever recovered. Official reports attributed the loss to partisan activity, though no resistance group operating in the region claimed responsibility. 1 month later, a Gestapo investigation team arrived to look into irregularities in the base's supply requisitions. They entered the forest, accompanied by local guides. The guides returned 3 days later, alone and refusing to speak about what had happened. The Gestapo officers were never seen again. By September 1944, even high command had begun to notice the anomalies. Radio contact with the base became sporadic, then ceased entirely. Couriers sent to investigate would reach the general vicinity but reported being unable to find the entrance, despite carrying detailed maps. It was as if the forest itself had grown hostile, deliberately obscuring the route. One courier, found wandering near the Czech border in a state of severe dehydration and psychological shock, claimed he'd spent 3 days walking in circles, always returning to the same clearing, always hearing sounds beneath his feet. Machinery, he said, or something that sounded like machinery but had a rhythm that was wrong. Organic, alive. The last confirmed contact with Colonel Steiner came on October 7, 1944, in the form of a coded telegram sent to military headquarters in Prague. The message was brief and cryptic. Project Morgenrot complete. Sealing primary entrance. Do not attempt entry. Repeat, do not attempt entry. Site will remain dormant until recall signal received. The telegram was signed with Steiner's authentication code, but the phrasing disturbed the receiving officer enough that he forwarded it up the chain of command with a notation. Recommend immediate investigation. Message tone suggests psychological deterioration. No investigation was authorized. 2 weeks later, the officer who'd sent the memo was reassigned to the Eastern Front. He died at Stalingrad in November. By the time Soviet forces swept through Czechoslovakia in May 1945, the base had become a ghost story. Local villagers, questioned by advancing troops, spoke of lights in the forest, strange sounds that echoed from beneath the ground, and German soldiers who'd entered the trees and never returned. But when Soviet intelligence teams attempted to locate the site, they found nothing. No bunkers, no entrances, no evidence that anything military had ever existed in that section of forest. A KGB report filed in June 1945 noted the discrepancy between local accounts and physical findings, concluding that the stories were likely partisan propaganda designed to intimidate occupation forces. The mystery might have ended there, forgotten in the chaos of post-war reconstruction, except for one persistent detail. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, foresters working in the Bohemian region reported anomalies. Sections of forest where trees wouldn't grow properly, their roots refusing to penetrate more than a few feet before turning back toward the surface. Areas where compasses spun erratically, where radio equipment malfunctioned without explanation, where animals refused to tread. One forester, a man named Lucas Cerny who'd worked the region for 30 years, kept a private journal documenting the strangeness. He described a clearing, roughly circular, where the ground felt hollow underfoot, where, on certain nights, you could hear humming from below, rhythmic and mechanical and wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. Cerny died in 1971. His journal was discovered by his granddaughter in 2015 and published online, where it attracted the attention of amateur historians and conspiracy theorists in equal measure. For decades, the forest kept its secrets. Governments changed. Borders shifted, the Iron Curtain fell, the old stories faded into legend, dismissed as wartime paranoia and local folklore, but the forest remembered. And in 2024, 80 years after Steiner's disappearance, it would finally reveal what had been buried beneath its roots. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Anna Weiss, a geologist from Charles University in Prague, was conducting ground-penetrating radar surveys of the Bohemian forest as part of a climate research project. She wasn't looking for wartime bunkers. She was mapping underground water systems to understand how climate change was affecting the region's hydrology. But on September 23, 2024, her equipment detected something that made no geological sense. A massive void, 90 feet beneath the surface, with chamber walls too regular to be natural, and within those chambers, metallic structures that showed up on the radar like bones beneath flesh. Dr. Weiss ran the scan 3 more times, certain her equipment was malfunctioning. Each scan returned the same impossible result. Something enormous was down there, something constructed, something that had been hidden for 8 decades. Within 48 hours, the Czech Ministry of Defense had cordoned off a square kilometer of forest. Within a week, excavation crews had arrived, accompanied by military historians, archaeologists, and intelligence officials from 3 different countries. The story leaked, as stories always do, and within days the forest was surrounded by journalists, curiosity seekers, and descendants of those who'd vanished into these woods 80 years before. The first breach into Steiner's base came on October 15, 2024. It took 6 days of careful excavation to locate and expose the hidden entrance, still concealed behind its hydraulic rock face, still sealed as tightly as the day Steiner had closed it from within. When the cutting torches finally penetrated the steel door, releasing a gust of air that smelled of rust and concrete and something else, something organic and wrong, the excavation team hesitated. Dr. Weiss would later describe that moment in testimony given to a closed parliamentary committee. We stood at the threshold of something that wasn't supposed to exist. And the air that came out, it wasn't just stale. It was heavy. It carried weight, like standing at the mouth of something that had been breathing in the dark for 80 years. The first level appeared exactly as Steiner had left it. Barracks with beds still made, a kitchen with dishes stacked in cabinets, supply rooms filled with crates of food now reduced to dust and rust. But it was the condition of everything that disturbed the investigators. No decay beyond what time alone would cause. No evidence of animals, no insects. Nothing had entered this space since 1944. It was a tomb, preserved perfectly, waiting. They found Steiner's first journal in the command center, lying open on a desk as if he'd just stepped away. The final entry, dated October 6, 1944, contained a single sentence that would haunt everyone who read it. Tomorrow I descend to the third level for the last time. God forgive me for what I've awakened. The archaeological team stood in that empty command center, staring at words written 80 years ago by a man who'd vanished without trace. And slowly, inevitably, their eyes turned toward the stairwell that led down to the second level, down to the third, down to whatever Colonel Karl Steiner had found in the depths of the Bohemian forest, whatever he'd spent his final months trying to contain, whatever had been waiting in darkness for 8 decades, patient and hungry and aware. The descent was about to begin, and what they would find in the Circle of Dawn would challenge everything historians thought they knew about the war, about Steiner, and about what humanity had almost unleashed in those desperate final years of the Third Reich. The second level confirmed what everyone had begun to suspect. This wasn't just a military bunker. It was a research facility, and whatever Steiner had been researching went far beyond anything documented in the historical record. The laboratory took up the entire second level, a circular space lined with workbenches, equipment that predated modern electronics by decades, and filing cabinets filled with documents in languages that mixed German with symbols no linguist could identify. Dr. Weiss's team spent 3 days cataloging the second level before attempting descent to the third. What they found painted a picture of a project that had spiraled far beyond its original parameters. Notebooks filled with calculations that made no sense according to conventional physics. Diagrams of geometric patterns that induced headaches when studied too long. And photographs, hundreds of photographs, documenting something that should have remained buried. The photographs showed the cave system before Steiner's modifications. Natural chambers carved by water over millennia. But in the deepest chamber, the one that would become the third level, the photographs revealed something impossible. Carved into the bedrock were symbols, not recent carvings, not weathered by centuries, but by millennia. Analysis of the photographs by geological experts dated the cave formations to approximately 12,000 years old. The symbols were carved when the last ice age was ending, when humans were barely past the Stone Age, when no civilization on Earth possessed the technology to create what those symbols represented. Steiner's notes documented his discovery of the chamber in March 1944. His initial reaction was scientific curiosity mixed with professional skepticism. But as excavation continued and more of the chamber was revealed, his tone shifted. March 28th. We've cleared the debris from the chamber floor. The symbols cover every surface, not just the walls, the floor, the ceiling, as if whoever created this wanted to ensure the message would survive the death of mountains. But what message? What could ancient people, primitive by every measure, have been trying to communicate that required this level of permanence? April brought revelation and horror in equal measure. April 15th. We've activated the array. I don't know what else to call it. The symbols aren't decorative, they're functional. When traced in the correct sequence, which took us weeks to decipher, they produce a resonance. Not sound, not light. Something else. Something that affects consciousness directly. My men reported dreams the first night after activation. Dreams of cities that never existed, technologies that shouldn't be possible, and warnings. Always the same warning. They went too far. They opened doors that should have remained closed, and it destroyed them. The journal entries grew increasingly fragmented as summer approached. Steiner wrote of team members requesting transfer, claiming the base was affecting their minds, of soldiers who'd entered the third level reporting voices that weren't audible but felt, pressing against their thoughts like fingers against glass, of equipment malfunctions that defied explanation, machines turning on by themselves, displaying readings that corresponded to nothing measurable. June 3rd. I've ordered the third level sealed. Command disagrees, wants the research to continue, but I'm the ranking officer on site and I'm exercising my authority. Whatever the ancients created down there, it wasn't meant to be reactivated. The dreams have become worse. Last night, all 47 men in this facility had the same dream. We compared notes this morning. Identical. a city burning. Not with fire, but with light. Pure white light that consumes everything it touches. And in the center of that light, something emerging. Something vast and patient and utterly inhuman. We woke screaming. The team in 2024 read these accounts with growing unease. But the investigation had to continue. On October 22nd, 3 weeks after the initial breach, they descended to the 3rd level. The vault door stood before them, sealed with a locking mechanism that would have required explosives to bypass. But someone had already bypassed it. The door stood open, its security protocols disabled with professional precision, and carved into the steel in what appeared to be recently made scratches were 3 words in Czech. He is awake. The 3rd level was everything Steiner's notes had described and more. A circular chamber 200 feet in diameter, carved from solid bedrock with precision that shouldn't have been possible 12,000 years ago. Every surface was covered in the symbols from the photographs, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and move when observed from different angles. But it was the center of the chamber that stopped the team cold. A structure, perfectly circular, 30 feet in diameter, rising from the floor like a pillar of stone so smooth it appeared to be glass. But it wasn't glass. Analysis would later reveal it was the bedrock itself, somehow transformed at a molecular level into a material that matched nothing in the geological record. And within that pillar, visible through its translucent surface, was something that defied every law of physics the team knew. It looked like machinery, though calling it machinery felt inadequate. Crystalline structures that pulsed with faint light, geometric shapes that existed in more dimensions than the human eye could process, causing nausea and disorientation when viewed directly. And at its core, a sphere of absolute darkness that seemed to pull light into itself, creating a gravitational lens effect that bent the air around it. Dr. Weiss approached the structure despite every instinct screaming at her to flee. Her instruments recorded electromagnetic readings that spiked off the charts, temperature fluctuations of 50 degrees within inches of each other, and most disturbing, a rhythmic pulse emanating from the sphere at exactly 7 beats per minute, the same rate as human respiration during deep sleep. They found Steiner's 2nd journal at the base of the pillar, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed inside a military ammo box. The entries inside explained everything and nothing. October 3, 1944. I understand now what the ancients were trying to preserve. Not knowledge, a warning. This structure predates human civilization by thousands of years. It's not ours. It never was. We're not the first to rise from savagery to civilization. We're not even the second. The symbols tell the story of those who came before, how they reached toward the stars, how they discovered technologies that let them reshape reality itself, and how, in their hubris, they activated something they couldn't control. October 5th brought the final revelation. The device in the pillar is a gateway, not to another place, but to another state of being. The ancients opened it, and something came through, something that exists outside our understanding of consciousness, of matter, of time itself. It consumed their civilization in what the symbols describe as 7 days of unmaking. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. Those who survived sealed the gateway and carved this chamber as a memorial and a warning. They made sure the knowledge of how to activate it would die with them. But we found it anyway, and in our arrogance, we activated it. God help us, we opened the door. The final entry was dated October 6th, written in handwriting so erratic it was barely legible. I can feel it pressing against the seal. The device is still dormant, but the very act of activation created a beacon. It knows we're here. It knows what we've done. I've sealed the base, destroyed the access codes, made sure no one else can find this place. My men are gone. I sent them away while I still could, though I suspect it followed them. They'll carry it out into the world like a disease. But perhaps I can contain it here. Perhaps if I remain, if I keep watch, I can prevent what's coming. I was wrong before. The door isn't open, but it's unlocked, and something on the other side is pushing. The investigation team stood in that ancient chamber, reading the desperate words of a man who'd died 80 years ago, and realized the implications. If Steiner had been right, if something had been awakened in 1944, then sealing the base had only delayed the inevitable. And now, in 2024, they'd opened it again. The incidents began within 48 hours of the third-level breach. Team members reported dreams of the White City burning. Equipment malfunctioned in patterns that matched Steiner's descriptions from 1944. And on October 25th, 3 days after they'd opened the third level, Dr. Anna Weiss disappeared. She'd been conducting final measurements in the chamber, accompanied by 2 assistants. When they turned to ask her a question, she was gone. The chamber had only one entrance, and they'd been standing in front of it. There was nowhere she could have gone, but she'd vanished as completely as Steiner had 80 years before. The only evidence that she'd been there at all was her notebook lying open on the ground, a single sentence written in handwriting that wasn't hers. The door remembers those who knock. The Czech government sealed the site permanently 2 days later. Concrete was poured into the entrance shaft, filling it completely. The forest was declared a nature preserve with access forbidden under penalty of law. Official statements claimed geological instability. The truth was classified at a level that ensured it would remain secret for decades, possibly forever. But sealing the base solved nothing. Because whatever Steiner had awakened, whatever ancient warning he'd ignored, was already out. The team members who'd descended to the third level began to vanish one by one. Not dramatically, not mysteriously. They simply walked away from their lives, abandoning homes and families without explanation, drawn back toward the forest by something they couldn't name but couldn't resist. By December 2024, only 3 members of the original excavation team remained. They were placed under psychiatric observation, diagnosed with shared delusions and post-traumatic stress. But the doctors couldn't explain why all 3 drew the same symbols on the walls of their rooms, the same geometric patterns that covered the chamber beneath the Bohemian forest. The same warnings carved by a civilization that had died trying to prevent what was coming. Colonel Karl Steiner had tried to stop it. He'd spent his final months alone in the dark, standing guard over a gateway that should never have been opened. He'd sacrificed himself to buy humanity time. 80 years. That's how long his sacrifice had held. And now, the door was open again. The beacon was active. And something vast and patient and utterly inhuman had begun its slow return. The forest grows thick over the sealed entrance. The trees remember what lies beneath. And on certain nights, when the wind is right, locals still report hearing sounds from underground. Not machinery, not voices, something else, something that sounds like breathing, deep and slow and patient, waiting for the door to finally open all the way. Colonel Steiner understood the price of curiosity. He paid it with his life, and possibly his soul, trying to undo what his ambition had unleashed. Whether his sacrifice bought humanity enough time to prepare or merely delayed the inevitable remains to be seen. But in the forests of Bohemia, beneath concrete and steel and 80 years of accumulated silence, something waits. Something that was old when our ancestors were learning to make fire. Something that the ancients died trying to warn us about. And somewhere, in places that exist outside our understanding of space and time, the door continues to open. Slowly, inevitably, patient in the way only immortal things can be. The question isn't whether it will fully open. The question is what comes through when it does.